Welcome to the Chosen Few, where today we join the crew of the HNLMS Friso in its fierce defense of the Netherlands as the German Blitzkrieg thunders across the border. So if you would like to join in, pick a number between 1 and 63 and see if you survive this fateful episode. Don't forget to pop your number in the comments below. The year 1940 was a time of sleek destroyers and massive battleships, symbols of modern naval power. Yet, our story begins with a humble survivor from a forgotten era, the HNLMS Friso. Commissioned over 2 decades earlier in 1915, the Friso was a gunboat. A wide-beamed, sturdy vessel built not for ocean combat, but for the shallow, complex coastal waters of the Netherlands. She was a relic of a time when naval threats came slowly, sailing from the horizon. Her strength lay in her heavy guns, 4 10.5cm semi-automatic cannons. These were serious naval weapons, mounted in single shields, one fore, one aft, and one on each side amidships. This configuration allowed her to deliver a devastating broadside of 3 guns, perfect for shore bombardment or dueling with surface ships. In the chaotic coastal defense of the Netherlands, these guns made her a formidable floating artillery battery. But time and technology had passed the Friso by. Her entire defense against the vertical terror of the German Air Force consisted of just 2 aging 12.7mm machine guns. Against the sleek, modern bombers of the Luftwaffe, these were little more than desperate prayers. The Friso was armed for the last war, forced to fight the first truly modern one. Aboard her decks were the 63 men of her crew, not the career sailors of the Grand Fleets, but largely reservists. Fishermen, dock workers, and young men called up for service, now under the command of Lieutenant Commander J.M. de Vries. They knew their ship was old, but they also knew their post was vital. These were the men who would soon face the full, terrifying shock of the Blitzkrieg at sea. The geographical stage for the Friso's last stand was the massive engineering feat that defined the central Netherlands, the Afsluitdijk. This dam, a ribbon of concrete and stone stretching 32 kilometers, was more than just a barrier separating the fresh water of the IJsselmeer from the Wadden Sea. It was the bottleneck, the final major land route into the Western Heartland, known as Fortress Holland. If the Germans could break this line, the country would fall in a matter of hours. At the western entrance to the dike stood the heavily fortified complex of Fort Cornwallisand. This was no medieval castle. It was a marvel of pre-war engineering. 17 concrete casemates housed anti-tank guns and heavy machine guns, providing interlocking fields of fire that made a direct frontal assault suicidal. A garrison of 230 determined Dutch soldiers waited inside. The German command, however, was not easily deterred. The primary Wehrmacht objective was to maintain momentum. They could not afford to be delayed by a single fort. Therefore, their strategy became clear: find a way to bypass the fort. And the only feasible bypass route was across the very body of water the dam had created. The IJsselmeer. This put the Friso directly in the crosshairs. The moment the German invasion, Fall Gelb, began in the pre-dawn darkness of May 10, 1940, chaos erupted. The terrifying sound of distant bombs and the steady reports of German artillery replacing the morning quiet. The Friso and her sister ships of the IJsselmeer flotilla were immediately put into action. Intelligence suggested German forces, having swept through the northern provinces, were converging on the eastern shores of the lake, particularly around the port of Stavoren. Their goal was simple: commandeer ferries and barges, and launch an amphibious crossing to seize the vulnerable western coast. The orders to Lieutenant Commander de Vries were unequivocal: stop all water movement. Deny the enemy the flank. As the morning progressed, German ground forces occupied Stavoren and began assembling their makeshift invasion fleet. It was at this moment, steaming into the shallow, fresh water of the IJsselmeer, that the old gunboat finally found a fight perfectly suited to its design. The Friso and the larger gunboat, HNLMS Johan Maurits van Nassau, maneuvered for position. The stage was set for the Friso's day of glory. The sun rose on May 10, 1940, to the soundtrack of war, but on the IJsselmeer, the Dutch were ready. The German forces, having secured the eastern bank, rushed to implement their amphibious bypass. Makeshift embarkation points were established at ports like Stavoren, with ferries and commandeered civilian barges being loaded with troops and vehicles. For the Wehrmacht, it was a simple tactical problem: get troops across the water before the slow-moving gunboats could react. They misjudged the Dutch resolve. Lieutenant Commander de Vries ordered the HNLMS Friso into a pre-calculated firing position. The ship's wide beam, usually a liability in open seas, provided a stable platform, and the gun crews, focused and grim, prepared to use their powerful 10.5 cm guns as intended. The guns roared to life, 3 shots at a time, directed by experienced fire control officers. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The German forces on the exposed shore were pinned down. The high-explosive shells from the Friso and her sister ships ripped apart the shoreline, scattering troops and leveling temporary staging areas. Critically, the gunboats successfully tracked and targeted the German-used ferries. A direct hit on a ferry loaded with troops around Stavoren sent the vessel and its confused cargo sinking into the shallow freshwater. This was a major, tangible victory. The naval presence was forcing the German ground offensive to a halt. The Friso successfully destroyed at least one key German artillery position that had been set up to shell the ships, and multiple attempts by German forward units to cross the water were abandoned under the accurate, persistent bombardment. For 2 days, the Friso acted as an unbreakable shield, protecting the flank of the Afsluitdijk fortifications. While the Friso dominated the water, the defenders at Fort Kornwouderzand were delivering an equally brutal lesson on land. The German infantry and engineers, confident from their easy victories elsewhere, launched a frontal assault, expecting the Dutch fortress to crumble. They were met with sustained, overlapping fields of fire from the reinforced concrete casemates. Every German attempt to approach the dam, to lay mines, or to bring up effective artillery was countered and shattered. The most humiliating moment for the Wehrmacht came when they brought up heavy guns, thinking to pound the fort into submission. But the Friso and her sister ship, the larger HNLMS Johann Moritz van Nassau, maneuvered into position and began to shell the German artillery batteries from behind the firing line. The combination of the unyielding fort and the punishing naval fire meant the dam was not only holding, it was actively inflicting heavy casualties. The Battle of the Afsluitdijk was becoming an embarrassing stalemate for the invaders. The Friso's successful interdiction on May 10th and her continuous presence on May 11th had effectively stopped the German plan in its tracks. This success, however, was the ship's death warrant. The German High Command, already frustrated by the total failure to take the fort by land, could not tolerate this persistent, unexpected threat from the water. The Friso had proven that traditional artillery could not defeat her, and ground forces could not bypass her. There was only one solution left. The call went out for the decisive application of overwhelming power, the Luftwaffe. Intelligence and scouting flights confirmed the location of the slow-moving gunboats. The air formations, consisting of deadly Junkers Ju-88 medium bombers, fast, versatile, and excellent at dive bombing, were assigned the mission to eliminate the IJsselmeer flotilla. The Friso was marked for destruction. As the sun set on May 11th, the crew of the Friso might have felt a sense of pride. They had held the line. They had delivered a bloody nose to the Blitzkrieg. But they were now directly in the sights of the most fearsome weapon the enemy possessed, and their only defense was 2 small machine guns. The storm clouds were not gathering on the water. They were being prepared at airfields hundreds of miles away, ready to deliver a fate the old gunboat was never designed to withstand. The morning of May 12, 1940, dawned clear and crisp. Perfect weather for an aerial engagement. The HNLMS Friso was continuing its patrol duties, maintaining the crucial fire support position off the eastern flank of the Afsluitdijk. The men knew the German frustration was reaching a boiling point. They had proven untouchable from the land, but the true threat always came from the sky. The waiting did not last long. The lookouts screamed the warning. Aircraft approaching. The air was soon filled with the droning roar of the Junkers Ju-88 bombers. These were not the slow, vulnerable aircraft of the previous war. These were fast, modern machines, organized in a devastating tactical formation, executing a coordinated anti-ship strike. Their mission was clear: eliminate the Dutch naval threat immediately. The crew of the Friso scrambled to their meager anti-aircraft posts. Two single, exposed 12.7mm machine guns. This was their entire defense against a wave of high-speed bombers carrying heavy ordnance. The men opened fire, the rapid thud-thud-thud of the machine guns barely audible beneath the shriek of the descending German engines. It was a valiant but desperately unequal fight. The rounds barely reached the bombers, let alone deterred them. The bombers began their lethal work. The Friso, a small target on the vast, exposed water of the IJsselmeer, was brutally targeted. The water around the ship erupted in massive geysers as near misses shook the hull violently. The crew were thrown from their feet, their morale under savage pressure, but they held their positions, continuing to fire the main guns whenever possible, and frantically maneuvering the ship. Then came the catastrophic hit. A German bomb tore through the deck, striking the vessel right beside the central smokestack. The explosion was immediate and terrifying. Steam, smoke, and debris shot into the sky. The force of the blast tore apart the superstructure, instantly killing and injuring men, and severely compromising the hull's integrity. The Friso shuddered, listed violently, and began to take on water uncontrollably. The crew knew instantly the damage was fatal. Lieutenant Commander J.M. de Vries, maintaining his composure amidst the devastation, immediately gave the order to abandon ship. The attack had been swift and merciless, but now the priority shifted entirely to saving the sailors who had fought so bravely. Fortunately, nearby Dutch minesweepers, including the HNLMS Abraham van der Hulst, quickly rushed to the scene. Under the continuous, terrifying threat of renewed air attacks, the rescue mission began. Sailors scrambled into life rafts and clambered onto the decks of the rescue vessels. But the tragedy was undeniable. As the HNLMS Friso slipped beneath the surface, settling onto the bottom of the shallow IJsselmeer, she claimed the lives of 3 devoted members of her crew. Matroos First Class GFA Van Dam, Matroos First Class MC van der Kooi, and Marine Private First Class J.H. Sikking. These men were the ultimate casualties of the gunboat's fierce, outdated defense. Sacrifice and legacy, just before the ship was entirely lost, a final order was issued to scuttle the vessel entirely. It was a grim finality, ensuring that not a single piece of the Friso could be salvaged and used by the enemy. Her watch was over. The Friso was gone, and the IJsselmeer flotilla was broken. The German army now had a clear path to flank the Afsluitdijk. However, the gunboats had bought critical time. The legendary Fort Cornwallisand never fell to the German attack. It held off every single assault until the end of the campaign. The ultimate tragedy, however, lay in the strategic reality. Despite the heroic resistance of the Friso and the resilience of the fort, the Netherlands was collapsing elsewhere. On May 14th, following the devastating terror bombing of Rotterdam, the Dutch High Command was forced to surrender. The Battle of the Afsluitdijk, a perfect military victory, was overshadowed by the national defeat. Today, the HNLMS Friso lies on the bottom of the IJsselmeer, a quiet monument to courage. Her story is a perfect microcosm of the early war. A dedicated crew, an outdated ship, a vital mission, and the brutal reality that bravery alone could not stop the combined fury of the Blitzkrieg. She was a small ship that fought a massive war, and her fight, brief and costly, secured her place in the heroic history of the May days of 1940. So in today's episode, there were unfortunately 3 fatalities. So if you had one of the following 3 numbers, unfortunately, you did not make it this time. 21, 47, 33. So I hope you will now join us for a moment of remembrance for the real heroes of this story. Matroos First Class GFA Van Dam, Matroos First Class MC van der Kooi, and Marine Private First Class J.H. Sikking. Thank you all for tuning in, and we hope to see you again for the next exciting episode.